We are in the 6th week of the virus. The price of chickens has gone up to $15 a piece. Now, that's a live chicken about that big. Who knows where this thing's going to go? A lot of changes going on. Not too long ago, I wanted to slow everything down to wagon speed. And the kind of wagon I'm talking about is a covered wagon. It's not even being pulled by horses. It's being pulled by oxen. So I wondered, can I get this thing and bring it down to oxen speed? They were really good on the prairie, had wide hooves, good traction, didn't sink in, but they were not real fast. So I came up with this one to bring life down, 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 more peaceful. Trust in you, Lord. I know you're gonna see us through. I will call on you, Lord. I know you're gonna see us through. 'Cause you're the keeper of my soul. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're the keeper of my soul. You are my rising sun, Lord. You push away the night. You are my rising sun, Lord. Bring in such sweet and gentle light. You're the keeper of my soul. Yeah, you're the one that makes my wagon run. Ripples on the lake, new things are taking shape. Wind blowing in a tree, hard wind right now. Something new, he's doing something new in you and me. Yeah, you make my wagon roll. You're the keeper of my soul. Yeah, you make my wagon There's some new things taking shape. Seasons of life moving on. And I know that I will trust in you, Lord. I know you're gonna see me through. You're the keeper of my soul. Yeah, you are. You're the keeper of my soul. Sometimes life can be a little like a merry-go-round, and we can feel, well, it's been that way lately with this virus. Yeah, it has felt something like that. Restrained, restricted to a small geographical area. But there's different areas in life, all different areas, spiritual, physical, relational. And somebody came along and blasted me off of the merry-go-round that I was so sick of being on. He set me free from that. But this music always reminds me of a merry-go-round. And the little story goes with it, really big story to me, of how I got off of that circular, repetitive, seemed like endless cycle. When I don't know how, but I remember where, when love was all around, and I said, Lord, come on in. I don't know how, but I remember when. I don't know how, but I remember when, in that little plain room in Isla Vista, down by Santa Barbara, loving you and He's loving me. He's a God with a plan, loving you and He's loving me. Yeah. He's a God with a plan. It was at a place like this. It was at a time like now, give or take a little bit. I said, Lord, come on in. The minister said, let's just take a few minutes and praise Him. I wasn't raised in church, so this was something different for me. Little storefront place. But something hit me that day, put me on the floor when they stood up. The Prince of Peace, the God of love, I said, Lord, come on in. Ooh, never searched again. My brakes went on in here. My brakes went on, landed right on Him. Yeah, come on, Jesus, come on in. He's loving you and He's loving me. He's a God with a plan. off the merry-go-round. Went a different direction with you. Thank you, Lord. All I gotta do is follow the road signs. He gives you road signs as you go. Get you off the merry-go-round. And how sweet can it be in him? This sweet. C major. He can make life sweet like that. He's done it for me, and he can do it for you. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. We are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loved me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loved me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. Every song for me is a pursuit, hopefully of excellence. Hope for that. But this one, I wanted to go for almost like a dark ages, an old castle-like with a walled-in town with a wall about 30 to 40 feet high, big stones concreted in there with a watchman walking up on the top, but with pretty sterile ground and dark, like half to two-thirds dark. Visibility, not so good. I wanted to capture that feeling. I suppose if you brought it over and related it to life, your life, my life, it would be a period not so bright, not so bright. It would be pretty shaded, pretty not so good, not so good. And so I wanted to pick that feeling up with this and run a message into that setting that can make for changes, good changes. Keeper of the city, keeper of the wall, keeper of the gates both great and small, keeper of the chain, keeper of the lock, keeper of the key that sets men free, keeper of our life, keeper of our times, keeper of our spirit when all down here is left behind. Tonight the stars, they'll be singing together. They'll be singing you're beautiful. I see faces in 1,000 windows. The call of your people, longing of your people, sometimes the tears of your people, cry of your people. We're looking, King on the throne. Yeah, you are our King. King on the throne. I see the choir marching in on this. Oh, marching into that big room. Come like the fog, you fall like the rain, you cover everything. Keeper of deep outer space, keeper of my little inner place. The size of your room, the size of your throne, the feel in the air, the sound of your voice. Stars, they'll be singing together. They'll be singing you're beautiful. I see faces in 1,000 windows. The heart of your people, longing of your people, the face of your people, watching for your face. King on the throne. singing you're beautiful. I see faces in 1,000 windows, people just wondering about you, Lord. The call of your people, longing of your people. Here comes the choir again. Oh, on that great day. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Ever get the feeling you're surrounded by something sleepless, powerful and deep? Deep, deep, deep. Ever get the feeling something moving on just out there, little beyond where you can see? Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I'll put a pull on you, I'll be pulling you to deep. Magnetism. You don't have to wrestle that alligator. Don't need to live a day or a year on the moon. No. Don't need to wrestle that alligator. Don't need to live a day and a year on the moon. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I'm gonna. Hey you! If I be lifted up, I'll put a pull on. What's a pull on sound like? It might be something like this. Something like this. It's a mystery how God calls us. It's a mystery. He called all. Thank you, Jesus, you called. God got an army made out of invading truth. Come right through your wall. Stand right in front of you. put a pull on you. I put a pull on you. You don't have to crawl across the desert. No, you don't have to do that. Don't need to come in first on some triathlon. Isn't that a relief? Don't have to crawl across the desert. Don't have to come in first on some triathlon. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I'm gonna put a pull on you. I'll be pulling on you.
Hello, my name is Steve Zeisler, and I'm glad to be with the R&R community tonight. I wish the circumstances were different, that we could be together and that our conversation, our thinking would be in person, but God has given us this opportunity, and I hope you're in a place where you can hear from Him tonight, that His words and His love for you will become clear as we consider a couple of stories from the New Testament. Recently, I was put in mind of the great Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby. I think it's perhaps the most mournful of all their songs, and it's got a haunting refrain. All the lonely people, where do they come from? Where do they all come from? All the lonely people, where do they all belong? The current conditions we live in, COVID-19 restrictions with social distancing and electronic communication only and keeping apart from one another, I think has shined a light on the question of loneliness. We're thinking of it more, aware of it more, but COVID-19 restrictions have done nothing to create the reality of loneliness. Rejection and isolation, loneliness, have their origin in our turning from God in the Garden of Eden. It goes back as far as it possibly can. And the answer to the Beatles question, where do they all belong, lonely people? The answer is they belong in the embrace of God. That's the way back for us. We belong known by Christ, embraced by Him, put in the presence in the middle of a community of people that belong to Him. And I want to, as I said, tell a couple of stories from the New Testament. Jesus reaching out to lonely people, two in particular, and see what we can learn, perhaps be encouraged by these stories. If you have a Bible and want to go there, I'm going to start with verse 35 of Luke 18, and then we'll move right over the chapter division and to look at some verses to begin chapter 19 of Luke. I want to encourage you to listen imaginatively, to sort of see these scenes, what it would be like to have been there, perhaps apply them to your heart in some way. But I'll start by reading, again, as I said, in verse 35 of Luke 18. As Jesus drew near to Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. And hearing a crowd going by, he inquired what this meant. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. So we picture a crowd, we picture Jesus in the midst of a crowd walking along a road and nearing the city of Jericho, and there's a blind man by the side of the road. He's not part of the crowd. He's the lonely figure in this story. And just to set the scene a bit further, this road is a well-known road. It is today from Jericho, which is near the Dead Sea, to Jerusalem, 15 miles or so, that distance. And it's one of the main roads into Jerusalem. And when the occasion we have here, this crowd and Jesus traveling toward Jerusalem, was for Passover. These folks in the crowd would be righteous people. They were the good people, the folks who did what they were supposed to do, which was go to Jerusalem for Passover. They were listening to Jesus, who was a celebrity figure at this point. He was controversial. They may not have all, in fact, probably did not, mostly all believe in him yet, but they were interested in him, and he had a lot to say, and he was a notorious celebrity and miracle worker, fascinating person. So they're traveling along this main artery, main road into Jerusalem on their way to Passover. And then we have this figure by the side of the road who is familiar in every place in the world, every era of history. Someone with a terrible physical disability who is poor probably because of the disability, and a beggar who is unable to do anything else but beg because he's blind. And the blind beggar, the disabled, poor person is marginalized by everybody else. No one knows how to fix the circumstance, and sometimes he's given alms and sometimes he isn't, but he's isolated. And so we find him by the side of the road. This combination of poverty, disability, marginalization is one. Again, as I said, we're familiar with it. We see it in our times and everywhere in the world. He was dealt a terrible hand. He was given hard circumstances, and his loneliness, his isolation, I think we should credit to the tough set of circumstances he was given in life. Now, he's got to make choices, and we'll see wonderful choices being made, but we can certainly sympathize and empathize and kind of feel brokenhearted even for his lonely circumstances. So let me move on. Verse 38, it says that he cried out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who were in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, what do you want me to do for you? And he said, Lord, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, recover your sight. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. So the action is taking place now, and the first part is, again, expected and familiar. The beggar by the side of the road doesn't want to be ignored, and he cries out. He hears a crowd. He would have cried out to all of them for alms of some kind, but he's made known that this figure whom everybody had heard of, this mysterious, notorious, is he from God or not figure, dangerous perhaps figure, Jesus, is going by, and so he cries out all the more. The crowd wants him silent. The man is determined to cry even louder. I think I might notice in passing, this is not, I think, a main point of the story, but how often it is that the most religious people, the best folks, the folks who are doing the right God thing, are often a barrier to people who are trying to find their way in. This crowd of good pilgrims, good Passover goers, had become a barrier between the needy man and Jesus. And as I said, that's not the main point of the story, but I think it might be worth us asking in our church, our settings, how often are the people who are listening to the Bible teacher the ones who are also pushing aside physically, or certainly not often physically, but by other ways, we get in the way, we elbow aside, we don't attend to the one by the side of the road. I think it's more common than it ought to be, and it's something that ought to perhaps, and I think should, challenge us to ask questions. Where are we getting in the way of people who might otherwise come to Jesus? But Jesus, again, made aware of this man, has him brought to him so they converse directly. And the Lord asks a profound question, because on one level, what the man wants should be obvious. The cry, "Have mercy on me," would have been made to every other passerby. The poor man saying, "Stranger, as you pass by, have mercy on me," which means give me money, alms, spare change, help me out, have mercy on me in that sense. And it might be, since it's such an obvious, the question has an obvious answer, that Jesus we might be surprised when he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" But he knows that this man, perhaps by the tone of his voice, perhaps because he refers to him as son of David, perhaps for some other reason, he knows that this man may be willing to go deeper than just getting alms. And so he asks the question, and the blind man makes an extraordinary answer. "Lord, I want to recover my sight." The giving of alms, I think, represents what we might call temporary relief. If I get enough to get shelter for tonight, my living, and enough food, and perhaps someone who I can pay someone to help me with my condition of blindness, and that would be a great thing for me, as in my condition, to get some temporary relief. And often we ask God, I think, for temporary relief for the painful circumstances we live in. We're willing to live with just that much. Have mercy on me, help me out. There's an old country song, I think, again, is a fairly haunting song, and it's a guy trying to, the premise of the song is a guy trying to create a one-night stand with a woman because he's desperate. I don't care what's right or wrong. I don't try to understand. Let the devil take tomorrow. Lord, tonight I need a friend. Yesterday is dead and gone. Tomorrow's out of sight. It's too hard to be alone. Help me make it through the night. And the hope is that loneliness can be salved for one night at a time, that there's enough relief to get by, that I won't descend any further into pain by getting a little bit of help. But the man does not ask Jesus for temporary relief. He doesn't ask him for money. He doesn't ask him for just today's survival. He asks him for a miracle. Lord, I want to recover my sight. And Jesus' answer is, your faith has made you well. Receive your sight. An instantaneous physical miracle occurs. The man is made able to see, and then he says, your faith has made you well. Your faith has saved you. And then it says further that we know for sure that it isn't just a one-off moment, because it says going forward, he recovered his sight and he followed him, that is Jesus, glorifying God. He began a life, I think we can assume, what was a life of following Jesus after this, that everything had changed. And I want to pause maybe at this before we go on to the second story and just ask whether folks like us ask too little of God, whether we can't believe we're worthy of the really more beautiful thing, of the life-changing thing, of the forever intervention of God, or we're so disappointed by whatever has been handed to us we don't trust that anything good can happen. But if it's so, I hope this man's example will be a real challenge to us. Not just that we would feel better, but that we would call on God to break chains and forgive our sins. We would anticipate a vital relationship with God that doesn't fade, and a life of contribution to the purposes of God going forward, following him as this man did and glorifying God. Do we ask for too little? Is core loneliness something that God would deal with and deal with forever, or do we settle for too little? So that's the first story. A man who got given terrible circumstances, suffered loneliness as a result, and Jesus spoke to him and then miraculously intervened on his behalf. Now, if you're reading the Bible, you're going to see a chapter division here. Chapter 19 comes next, but there's no change in the time frame at all. Jesus is on the Jericho road, outside Jericho, and then he walks into Jericho. The same crowd is still there, and he'll proceed on eventually through Jericho and on up the road to Jerusalem. So the time frame and the circumstances and the place is the same. And we read in the second story, the second lonely man, and it says in chapter 19, verse 1, he, Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through. Behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. The blind man had terrible circumstances dealt to him, a terrible hand dealt to him. Zacchaeus is lonely and desperately lonely, but he made choices himself. He created many of the conditions that caused his loneliness. And of course, we're familiar with this too. People who, for various reasons, make decisions they think will gain them something, gaining the whole world, losing their soul, as Jesus says at one point there. And in this case, love of money is at the heart of a lot of Zacchaeus' choices. He thought getting rich would be his path to being everything he wanted to be, and he'll, as we'll see, finds himself with riches but nothing else. So he made choices. And I think it's important for us to realize that God doesn't just care for people who have awful things happen to them, but even who have awful things happen because they chose them. Even folks of that sort, people like most of us, I think, who regret things we've done and said and been, and wish we could go back and change them and can't, and have built the world, the hard world, sad world, lonely world we live in. We're there for a reason, but is there a way out? Zacchaeus, the way he created his circumstances was that he betrayed his people. It says that he was a chief tax collector and very rich. That he was a tax collector is the critical point. The Romans had conquered Palestine, had conquered Israel. They had occupied it, and in order to get taxes, they needed to persuade some of the locals who knew who had money and who didn't, who knew the territory, who understood the language. They needed to hire some people to betray everybody else in order to allow them to most effectively wring money out of the people. And so Zacchaeus decided that he was willing to do that, so that all of his neighbors, all of his family, all of his friends were now victims of him helping the hated Romans squeeze money from the population. There was one of the New Testament phrases is that Jesus was given a hard time because he reached out to sinners and tax collectors. Tax collectors and sinners are in the same bucket. In fact, tax collectors are a unique form of sin, rebellion, of being unacceptable to everybody else because they were traitors. And they got rich and everybody else was mistreated. So you can understand the loneliness issues that Zacchaeus lived with. He was rich, but he had stabbed in the back everybody else in his life, and his riches amounted to a form of isolation. He would have certainly been despised by the Romans, who treated him as a tool, and he was despised by his fellow Jews because he was a traitor. But I want to suggest one other little thing before we move on that may be part of this. We're told Zacchaeus was small in stature, and in the story, he has to climb a tree in order to be able to see Jesus, who was walking by, because the crowds were around him and he was too short to look over the crowds. And they would not have made way for him. He would have always been pushed way back as far as no one would have anything to do with helping him. So he climbs a tree, small in stature. But it may be, I think there's some suggestion that Luke includes the detail of his appearance, his size, because sometimes men, especially who don't measure up on the sports field, perhaps, who are small and made fun of, who, because they aren't able to sort of physically make their way when they're young, they get ridiculed. And it may be that Zacchaeus' choice to be a traitor has to do with payback for all the people that had made fun of him when he was younger. I don't know how many of you have paid attention to the kind of ESPN show on Michael Jordan in the 90s, the Chicago Bulls of the 90s. The most popular, the best, most popular, most amazing basketball team of all time, filled with these tall, awesome athletes, Jordan in particular, just astride the world because of their capabilities. But there's one person that's consistently ridiculed throughout the whole thing. The general manager of the Bulls in those days is a short, pudgy guy named Jerry Krause. And the athletes benefited from his genius. He was a great general manager, assembled the team. But they also just relentlessly made fun of him because he was a little guy amidst big guys. And I sometimes wonder if Zacchaeus was a smart guy who had been ridiculed when he was young, and he determined to pay back everybody for what had happened to him, and maybe for that reason was a traitor. But perhaps, whether that's the case or not, it is true that he had everything he wanted financially and lost everything else. He was alone, and no one would associate with him. And so we find him in a place where Jesus, he longing for something. Certainly he was interested in Jesus and maybe could not even articulate what he needed, but he was there hoping and climbed a tree, and we pick up the story in verse 5. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully, and when he saw it, they all grumbled. "He has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner," says the crowd. Everyone was astonished. They grumbled. They couldn't believe it. Jesus had gone to be a guest of Zacchaeus. Everything changes in this story for Zacchaeus when Jesus spoke his name. It's different than the earlier guy, the blind man. In this case, Zacchaeus was a nonentity, and Jesus calls him by. It was a nonentity because of his own choices. He was an outcast. He wasn't deserving of respect of any kind, and Jesus addresses him by name. He calls for a meal in which they are together. Both of these things, the naming, the meal together, are clear evidence of acceptance, that Jesus sees past the failures of Zacchaeus, that he wants to be with him, that he cares about him. And everything changes. That simple word of acceptance, that simple indicator that you matter to me. And we might think of the table of the Lord that we celebrate together, times when we come together into the presence of Jesus, welcomed by him, the bread, the body broken, symbolized by the bread, the blood shed, symbolized by the cup. Having a meal with Jesus and having a meal eventually then with others who are in the same place as us is the most intimate thing. And it's there's nothing about us, our failures, our hard hearts even, that is going to prevent the Lord from loving us. And that's all gathered up here, I think, in this indication that Jesus intends to have a meal with Zacchaeus, even though everybody else thinks he's undeserving. Our bad choices, the world that we've built because we're fools and have done the wrong thing and have perhaps acted as payback to folks that injured us, and money we've wanted instead of what we should have wanted. All of those things are not ultimately cause for failure. God reaches beyond those things. The Lord reaches beyond those things and puts his arm around us and indicates how much we mean to him. And so to finish the story of Zacchaeus, returning to verse 8, Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what is lost." The phrase Jesus uses here is that, or the declaration he makes is, "This man is also a son of Abraham." Meaning, as the crowd grumbled, as the pilgrims rejected him, as he had built a life isolated from everyone else, he still is no different than anyone else. Everyone in the world in which he lived, the world around them, was a son of Abraham, and he is just like them. The crowd has no business being proud of itself and ridiculing, rejecting of him. He's not different than anybody else, and that's part of the inclusion against loneliness. We're all of us undeserving of Jesus' acceptance, and all of us, he's just like everyone else. All of us find our welcome because of the initiative of Christ for us. Another thing, perhaps last thing to notice here, is that the two men who are broken and lonely and isolated and by themselves and heartsick over it and weary of their circumstances received completely different means of salvation from Jesus. In the one case, there's an instantaneous physical miracle, radically changes everything. The world is overturned in a moment, and the man becomes a follower of Jesus. And the Lord does that at times. When we're willing to ask for not just the momentary relief, but a lifetime's relief, maybe he will step in and change everything in a dramatic moment miraculously. That's has happened, can happen. There are stages in which dramatic physical miracles happen. They may happen more slowly over time, but you realize God has done something that only he can do. In the second case, there was no miracle. There was no changing of circumstances. There was no moment of power in which the world was changed. Jesus merely said, "Zacchaeus, you are a son of Abraham like everyone else. I want to have a meal with you. I know your name. I accept you. You do not have to live with all the terrible choices you made. And it's just a simple word of loving acceptance from the Son of God himself. And it is just as dramatic in its outcome. The amends that Zacchaeus makes, giving back everything that was taken fraudulently, all of the ways that he mistreated his people, all the ways that he served Rome to gouge folks for money, that he siphoned much of it off for himself. He offers to give back fourfold, stuff that he's stolen. This is, I think, familiar to anybody with that in 12 steps, that part of the process is making amends for what we've done, putting it right. And he does that immediately. And yet there's no physical miracle. There's a miracle of a revolutionized heart. You are accepted by the Lord, and that acceptance makes all the difference in the world. You and I are welcome at his table. All of us have the same brokenness, and it is healed in the same way that as he puts his arm around us and welcomes us into his presence. Back to the Beatles. All the lonely people, where do they all belong? And I think the 10th verse of Luke 18 reminds us that we have one who is seeking us in our loneliness, who understands our circumstances, whether it's disability and poverty, or whether it's arrogance, or whether it's any range of things in between. I think this may be one of Rick Toker's favorite verses. I don't know that for sure, but I'll just offer that to you. If you know Rick, you can ask him. But it says this in Luke 19:10. The Son of Man, this is a purpose statement. Jesus' reason for his actions, his entree into this world. The Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So if we're lonely, and maybe the COVID times is exasperating our loneliness, making it more obvious to us, making us willing to admit it, bringing it out in the open. Our loneliness is not God's intention for us. He wants to give us life. He wants to break the chains. He wants to forgive our sins. He wants to put his arms around us. And the question is, whether we'll ask for real life instead of partial life, whether we'll be willing to accept his invitation to a place at his table. And I hope that will be true of you. I hope wherever you are viewing this virtually on an R&R night, that you'll let the Lord love you. The Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost.